Were you a fan of Laura Ingalls and Little House on the Prairie back in the day? I certainly was, and today we're going to recreate some of those great looks as we sew the Prairie Girl pattern. The sewing tutorial will walk you through the steps for the dress, the pinafore, and the bonnet. To make it easy to access which portion of the video you're interested in looking at, I've included timestamps for the different elements in the description below. The video is going to start off with a construction of the Prairie Girl dress. Let's go ahead and get started. The dress consists of 5 pattern pieces, including the front of the dress, the back of the dress, the sleeve, front yoke, and the back yoke. For the first sewing step, you'll take the back yoke pieces, place it right sides together to the front yoke, and sew the shoulder seams both on the exterior portion as well as the lining. With our yoke and our yoke lining shoulder seams pressed open, we're going to place them right sides together. I'm using the same fabric for both in this case, but if you're using a lining and an exterior portion of the fabric, you want the lining side to be up. For the next step, we're going to pin those 2 pieces together. We're going to sew around the neck opening and down the left back opening. With the yoke and the yoke lining pieces sewn together, we're going to clip and trim in towards that seam allowance and turn it right side out. We'll take that over to the sewing machine and just baste the 2 pieces together at the outer raw edge. With our base stitch in place, we'll take the front and the back of the dress, place them right sides together, and sew the side seams. We're going to press those side seams open, and at this point you can either zigzag or serge the left and right back opening. We'll set the dress aside and we'll grab the sleeve pieces. We'll turn the hem edge of the sleeve up 3/8 of an inch and give it a press, and that's how we'll form the casing for the elastic. With our casing sewn, we'll grab our elastic, we'll run it through the end of the sleeve, securing it at one end, pull the elastic to fit the doll's wrist, and then secure the second side. A tool that I like to use when running the elastic is just a simple bobby pin with one of the prongs turned in towards the other side to create a more even edge. With the elastic in place, we'll place the sleeves right sides together and sew the underarm seam. With the seam pressed open, we're going to turn the sleeves right side out. Next, we'll pin the sleeves to the dress, matching the sleeve seam to the side seam of the dress. This is what our dress looks like with our sleeves installed. So the next step is to run 2 gathering stitches along the neckline edge. What I'm going to do is place one less than 1/4 of an inch from the raw edge and then one significantly lower so that I get a nice even gather around the yoke of the dress. Here you can see the gathering lines on the top of the dress, and before attaching it to the yoke, I want to make 3 lines with my heat erasable marker. One at the center of the dress and one at the sleeve cap center on both sleeves. That's going to be a point of reference that I use as I pin the dress to the yoke. I'm going to pull the gathers at the top of the dress to match the center of the yoke as well as the shoulder seams. I do want to do my yoke with the left back opening side finished, so the way you would refer to that is by turning it over and realizing that this is going to be the left back opening before I pin the 2 pieces together. On the right back opening, I'm going to line up the raw edge of the yoke with the serged edge of the right back. On the left back opening side, I'm actually going to go past with the dress, 1/4 inch past the yoke, and then I'm going to fold it back and pin it in place. Let's get that sewn together. After checking both sides, you can trim back some of these threads and then run a zigzag stitch along the yoke edge. Once you have the seam allowance pressed down, you can go ahead and remove that lower gathering stitch. For the next 2 steps, we're going to finish the raw right opening of the yoke, as well as turn the hem edge of the garment up 1/4 of an inch and create the hem. With the hem in place, we'll place the dress right sides together and sew the center back seam from the hem edge to the dot as indicated on the pattern. We'll press our seam allowance to the left, add a snap at the neck, and our first piece from the Prairie Girl pattern will be complete. With our dress complete as shown here on in, we're going to turn our attention to the actual pinafore, which looks just like this. The inside of the pinafore is lined through the top of the bodice right along those ruffled edges, but the rest of the seams are finished with a serge or overlock stitch. So in order to get started, we'll look at the pattern pieces. You can see that the Pinafore is created with 6 pattern pieces. We have the front and back, the ruffle that goes across the shoulder, the skirt to the Pinafore, the ruffle of the Pinafore, and then also the straps that close it at the waist. Because I wanted to use this particular floral cotton fabric, I will be making the Pinafore ties out of satin ribbon because I didn't have any more of this material available. Our first construction step is to take the back of the Pinafore, place it right sides together to the front, and sew the shoulder seams on the exterior portion as well as the Pinafore lining. With the shoulder seams pressed open, we'll grab the ruffle. You'll grab the ruffle, place it wrong sides together, and give it a press. Next, we'll run a gathering stitch along the raw edge. Referring back to the Pinafore bodice sections, you'll notice that there is a dot a ½ inch up from the waist edge on both the front and the back, and that's where we're going to start and stop our ruffle. So you're going to pull that gathering stitch and pin it in place on each side. Once you have your ruffle pinned to each side, you're going to go ahead and baste it in place. With our ruffle basted, we'll place the lining of the Pinafore bodice right sides together. We'll sew around the neck opening and up both sides. Do be careful as you sew around the neck opening that you don't catch the edge of the ruffle in that seam. After quickly confirming that the ruffle wasn't caught in the neck seam, we can sew up both sides. You're going to start that next seam a ½ inch from the raw edge of the waistband. We'll check both sides very carefully. We'll clip and trim down the seam allowance, then we'll press the back to the front through the shoulder channel. Once you have the other side through that shoulder channel, you want to be really careful and take your time to ease the back through to the front. Once you have both sides turned, you're going to go ahead and press the top. Next, we'll sew the center back seam. We'll open up those back sections, placing the fabric right sides together and lining right sides together and sewing the seam from one end to the other end. With the top portion of the pinafore constructed, we're going to turn our attention to the skirt portion. We're going to start that by hemming the lower ruffle and then run a gathering stitch across the top edge. Matching the center of the ruffle to the center of the skirt piece, you'll place them right sides together and pull the gathers until they're evenly distributed. We'll get our ruffle sewn in place. At this stage, I like to do an overlock stitch across the raw edge. You could also use a zigzag stitch here to do a nicer finish. Then we're going to bring it back over to the sewing machine and top stitch along that seam. Next, we'll hem the sides of the pinafore and run a gathering stitch along the waist edge. I'm turning the lining of the pinafore bodice up 1/4 of an inch and giving it a press. Next, I'm going to grab those skirt sections and I'm going to pull the gathers evenly to match both the front and the back of the pinafore. Pin it right sides together and sew the waist seam. Just a few more steps and our pinafore is complete. So if we open it up to the inside, this is what it looks like. We're going to hand finish the lining to the seam right there at the waist. We already pressed that seam allowance up. We started sewing a 1/2 inch from the finished edge, so that's going to leave us a small hole right here, an easy place to slip our straps in as we finish the straps to the side. I did say at the beginning that I have included a pattern piece for the straps, but because I only had a little bit of this fabric, I'm going to actually use some satin ribbon to do the ties at the waist. Let me grab my needle and thread, finish those final steps, and we'll see how our pinafore turned out. That completes the second piece to our Prairie Girl pattern. Let's move on to the bonnet and we'll almost be finished with our project for today. As you can see here, the pattern pieces are laid out. We have the main portion of the bonnet, as well as the bonnet brim, the bonnet ties, and this would just be the medium weight cardboard that's used to create the bonnet bill. A good weight of lightweight cardboard to use for that brim form is actually something equivalent to what you might find in a business card box. Our first sewing step is to take the brim pieces, place them right sides together, and sew all the way around the curved edge. After checking both sides, you're going to clip and trim the seam allowance, turn it right side out, and give it a press. You're going to take the cardboard form for the brim and just slip it to the inside. Don't be afraid to trim it down a little bit if necessary. I think that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to run a zigzag stitch along the raw edge just to hold the brim in place and to the cardboard. Looking at the bonnet back section, you can see a dot right here about a 1/2 inch up from the raw edge. We're going to clip into that area. We're going to hem the edge, both this little tiny extension as well as across the bottom of the bonnet. Because this is a really narrow hem, I like to run a really tiny zigzag stitch along the edge and then just turn the edge up just a tiny bit to create the hem. With our hem in place, we're going to run some gathering stitches along the rounded edge of the bonnet. Next, you'll line your bonnet up with the finished edge of the brim. You're going to pull the gathering stitch to match that raw edge, pin it in place, and then sew it in place. After you inspect both sides and everything looks to be okay, you can go ahead and run a zigzag stitch along that raw edge. About 1/4 of an inch up from the finished edge. You want to pull the elastic towards you as you sew to create that ruffle at the back of the neck. The last and final step is to get our straps created and sewn to our bonnet. We're going to place each of our straps with right sides together, sew down one long edge, and then do a rounding at the opposite side. We're going to clip and trim our seam allowance down, turn our straps right side out, and give them a press. The last and final step is to grab our bonnet, get our needle and thread, and attach the straps right at the side of the brim. Then we'll get the final photographs on our doll. Well, as you can see from our final pictures, Anne definitely can channel some Laura Ingalls. The Prairie Girl pattern was created in collaboration with the virtual doll convention Anne's Clubhouse subscription. If you're interested in learning more about Anne's Clubhouse and the Anne Fitzpatrick doll, I'll leave a link to the virtual doll convention in the description below. Thank you guys so much for stopping by today for this sewing tutorial. If you have any questions about the construction for the Prairie Girl pattern, please list it in the comments section below. I know that I always say it, but I really do appreciate your time and for watching. Please remember to hit that like and subscribe button and the notification bell if you'd like to be notified when I release the next video. I hope you enjoy making numerous outfits from this new Prairie Girl pattern, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.